I'm Jonathan. I lead the Sino-Southeast initiative. I'm joined here by Daniel, who leads our politics coverage today. Today, we have as our guests Karisma and Zane. We're so glad that they could join us. Karisma is a senior analyst under the Foreign Affairs and International Security Division at Bait Al-Amanah, an independent Malaysian think tank that has stakeholders across government, the private sector, the armed forces, and the diplomatic community. Karisma's research interests include geopolitics, US affairs, the South China Sea, and defense technology. His insights have been featured in platforms such as the Diplomat, Nikkei Asia, and the Royal Society of Asian Affairs. Zane is an analyst, also under the Foreign Affairs and International Security Division at Bait Al-Amanah. Zane's research interests encompass geopolitics, the South China Sea, and cybersecurity. We're so glad to have both of you join us today. Well, today we have
Thank you.
Of course. Today we plan to have a conversation on things like geopolitics, Malaysia's foreign policy and hedging and strategy, the upcoming ASEAN Summit, and Malaysia's ASEAN chairmanship. And I think it's especially timely that we have this conversation, which makes it very interesting because we have the 46th ASEAN Summit happening right here in Kuala Lumpur next week. And so perhaps just to begin the conversation as a broader lens on Malaysia's foreign policy, there have been many different assessments of Anwar Ibrahim's foreign policy approach. We have former Deputy Minister for International Trade and Industry, Ong Kian Ming, who describes it as this act of unbalanced balancing, leaning too heavily on actors like Russia, even though such engagement doesn't yield substantive economic wins for Malaysia. Karisma, I noticed that you wrote recently that Malaysia does value its domestic legitimacy in its foreign policy decisions. How would both of you best describe Anwar's general foreign policy strategy?
Thanks for the question, Jonathan. I think that's I have to agree that it is a very, very timely question, considering that we do have the ASEAN Summit happening next week. I know that Zane and I are not looking forward to the traffic that's going to ensue, but in terms of what it means for Malaysia, I think it's a very exciting time. But to try and tackle your question here, you quoted Ong Kang Ming using the term unbalanced balancing. I would argue that it's not so much balancing as it is managing. PMX is not necessarily trying to hastily balance both sides, but he's rather trying to manage both sides to maximize national benefit in, of course, a hedging strategy. And at the end of the day, as one of my mentors, Dr. Kwek Cheng Chi, likes to quote, all politics is local. And for Malaysians, the bottom line is the benefit to the country. And while some Malaysians favor the West and others favor looking towards Beijing, it is fairly agreed upon that the fundamental approach of the American foreign policy apparatus here is up in the air at the moment. And as such, it is it's unclear as to whether America can be reliably called upon. Their reduced presence, for example, in Lima, as we just saw this year, highlights that the US may not exactly be as present in the Indo-Pacific as they were once before. And so diversifying benefits by engaging with other states beyond the traditional Western partners is, to me, at least a no-brainer. This would be domestically acceptable, especially when considering that generally the conservative Muslim part of the Malaysian population still feels negatively towards the West, of course, due to the Palestinian issue. And with regard to what Ong Kang Ming has said, this was said last year in September, right? In his article, and it has not yet. This happened before Anwar Ibrahim went to China, of course, for his state visit, and a few other key engagements since then. So I would actually say that there have been this engagement and this so-called portrayed leaning towards China has seen some key results for us. And for Malaysia, there's also one key standout thing here, and there's a reduction in standoffs and tensions in our EEZ vis-a-vis the Chinese Coast Guard. So just that alone is a very good step forward for us, and also in protecting our economic security, considering our vast oil and gas interests in the South China Sea. So I would say that PMX's foreign policy strategy is about maximizing benefit through a strategic management of ties rather than just about balancing. While some may argue that this is not necessarily the case, seeing as Anwar has made some aggressive statements towards the West, there's still very much positive engagement with the West behind the scenes. For example, Australia still remains Malaysia's closest non-ASEAN defense partner, while the US Air Force also recently completed its first in-air refueling of a Malaysian jet. So there's still a lot of scenes, a lot of things going on behind the scenes that highlight that Anwar's management act is the right way forward for us right now.
Mm. You touched upon very briefly that there has been a reduced U.S. presence in the Lima conference. For our viewers, that is the Maritime and Aeronautical Langkawi Conference, is part of like the ASEAN conference and everything. I was curious if you could share more about the Trump's administration's participation in these sorts of international conferences and engagements with Malaysia. I understand, like across a long period of time, like across many administrations, the U.S. has been very hit or miss or volatile in its engagement with Southeast Asia. So I'm just curious, what's the latest flavor that we're getting from the Trump administration in the last, say, 6 months? Do you have a sense for that?
I think it's hard to ascertain whether the reduced presence in Lima was exactly because of what Donald Trump is thinking about the Indo-Pacific, because behind the scenes, it tends to be that regardless of who's at the Oval Office, the level of defense engagement still goes on. Regardless of whether it's a Republican or a Democrat in the office, the level of engagement behind the scenes still goes on. So it's hard to ascertain whether, you know, this reduced presence in Lima compared to 2 years ago, because of course the conference is held every 2 years, whether that's because of Trump's decisions or anything like that, or whether it's one of that's operational in nature. As I understand it, one of the strike groups is in the Malacca Strait, and of course that's such a strategic position for them to send some presence there. But in terms of the latest flavor we're feeling from the US, I cannot divulge exactly into what we've learned here, but in terms of the diplomatic side of things, there is some uncertainty even within the Western diplomatic community. But as far as the armed forces go, like Navy to Navy ties, Air Force to Air Force ties, as I understand it, things are going very much strong behind the scenes, and there's no indication that will reduce yet, or if that will change at all.
Zane, Karisma, I know you mentioned, there's this continuity in US policy, this engagement is still happening in the background. But wouldn't you agree in some respect, being under the Trump presidency, we're currently living in a kind of totally fundamentally different paradigm in that, the perspective here and argument is that Trump often doesn't see things as a zero-sum game, right? So we see the way in which he approaches things like tariffs. And so there's an argument by a former US trade negotiator that Trump is looking for more than neutrality in its tariff negotiations with Malaysia. Under this kind of perspective, first, do you agree with this characterization? And if so, if the goal of the US administration is to isolate China, how does Malaysia kind of pursue neutrality and pursue this effective strategic management?
You want to take that, Zane?
Well, I mean, this is a very tricky question. I think most countries are still trying to figure out what is the best formula that we can actually strike neutrality in accordance to US lenses. But I think in the context of Malaysia, we can't really separate our economy with the US. That is a fact. We have a huge trade surplus, and most of our FDI comes from the US instead of China. But the question is whether do we agree with your characterization that the Trump administration wants something more than neutrality, right? I think to a certain extent, I do agree with that. But I think Trump has to also understand, or at least the Trump administration, that Malaysia is one of the biggest semiconductor suppliers to the global market, and you cannot really push us around. I mean, it's a very heavy term, but you can't really push us around and just want Malaysia to do whatever the US wants. We have to be realistic, and for Malaysia, China is just right at the doorstep. And like it or not, China is a much more giant neighbor, and that's been more receptive to us and be more friendly to us. And most important of all, is the closest to us. So I think if the US really wants Malaysia to isolate China, not is very unlikely that's going to happen. And I think the best that we can move forward, at least for Malaysia, is to continuously negotiate with the US, with China, and so to make us feel like to position ourselves in a way that, hey, we are not taking sides. We want to be friends with everybody. And being friends with everybody doesn't mean we have to exclude our existing partnership, our existing alignments. Like, for example, in Lima, right, we have a larger presence from Russia in terms of air shows and some of booth presence, but that doesn't mean isolating our existing partnership with the US. It's just in addition to our partnerships with the US. I hope that sort of clears up or that answers the question, hopefully.
And to add to that, I at least I am with the belief that the Trump more than anything just wants to bring countries to the table under the pretext of tariff negotiations. Because I was doing an interview with Astro Awani last month, and I was asked something similar. How do we view Tunku Zafrul's delegation to Washington? What are we going to see real progress there? And I think that because the terms that have been negotiated in the last round of talks between Malaysia and the US, there's been quite some time since then. I do not remember exactly how long, but it's been, if I'm not mistaken, more than a decade since terms were last negotiated. So yeah, while Trump will make sure there's no free lunch for anyone, I think it's not just about trying to get countries to join American efforts to isolate China per se. Rather, it's just to get people back to the negotiating table, and if that includes to isolate China, then so be it to them. Yeah.
I think it's really interesting how you frame, Zane, how you frame Malaysia, though we are a small economy, still having this leverage. I think oftentimes people think that, small states naturally mean that we're going to be used as a geopolitical pawn. Perhaps I want to turn to something adjacent to this, which is the topic of BRICS, which has been quite a hot topic recently. Commentators have acknowledged the strategic, economic, and security benefits that could potentially accrue to Malaysia from joining the BRICS grouping are unclear, right? We don't know why Malaysia is specifically trying to join BRICS. And we know also that characters like Trump are extremely hostile. He has threatened to impose heavy tariffs on BRICS plus nations should they attempt de-dollarization. But we also know at the same time, Indonesia, which has been, for the longest time, what we call the most neutral nation, was recently joined BRICS. Wanted to get your thoughts here with regards to Malaysia's concrete goals with regards to joining BRICS.
Okay. Yeah, I think BRICS has just been such a big thing for the region as of late. And at least from my end here, yeah, there are potential strategic and security benefits or concerns even that could arise from joining BRICS. But for Malaysia, first and foremost, it's about the economics of it all. I mean, at the end of the day, like I mentioned in the response to your first question, it's about getting the maximum benefit to the country. And in this case, it just means that we are trying to spread out all our eggs from one basket. Just the fact that joining BRICS, it does not mean that we're shunning away the West per se, but we are just trying to ensure all our bases are covered here. And that's what I think is Malaysia's concrete goal. It is just to ensure that there are no pathways. We don't close off any pathways for us unnecessarily. So if you ask me, that is the concrete goal. But I'm sure Zane has some other views too.
I mean, apart Indonesia aside, I will touch on that later. But if you notice in Southeast Asia, most of us that enter BRICS, we enter BRICS as a partner country. We don't really enter BRICS as a full member. It's also a way for us to hedge around with the other powers to say, hey, we are dipping our toes into BRICS. Yes, that is very true. But I know you don't like it. And in a way, it's also one of the reasons why we enter BRICS as a partner country instead of full country. I mean, this is of course my take on things. And to whether why Indonesia joined BRICS as a full member in the first place is actually quite surprising. I think this January I went to Indonesia for field work to meet up with local government officials, with local think tank staffers. They were equally as blindsided as we are actually. And one of the core reasons that Indonesia in the past they've never joined BRICS. In fact, Jokowi during his administration, he has refused to join BRICS on the basis of wanting to focus on these domestic issues first. And it's very on brand of him. Jokowi has always been a domestic president. He leaves a foreign policy to his staffers, to his lieutenants, and the civil service. They are the ones that chart the course for Indonesia's foreign policy. But for Prabowo, this time is a little bit different. Prabowo has been, well, there are some things that I can't divulge given is national security. But let me see what I can share. Okay, so Prabowo likes, let's put it this way, Prabowo likes to chart his own foreign policy course. He was a former military man. He was, I think, one of the very strong families in Indonesia, political dynasties. And he just wanted to leave a mark apart from Jokowi. I mean, Jokowi has covered a lot of good things in Indonesia domestically. A high-speed rail from Jakarta to Bandung, the Palapa Ring for internet connectivity, and so on. For Prabowo, he has been proactively charting his course in foreign policy. He wants to place Indonesia on the map. And the first thing he does, of course, is to ascend Indonesia as a full member for BRICS. And we don't really know what goes on in afterwards because when I talk to officials there, I ask the same question. So what's next? I mean, you guys have joined BRICS. They say no one really knows. And realistically, no one can accurately represent what Prabowo is thinking at a point in time. So it's really up to the president. And for Indonesia, it has gone from the foreign policy has gone from a civil service oriented approach into a top-down policy making approach, where the top leadership decides the course for the foreign policy. And of course, there are some dissatisfaction within the foreign Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but it is what it is, and they just have to live through it at this moment. So circling back, I think we have moved a lot on Indonesia. Just circling back to Malaysia. Yes, I think Malaysia is interested in joining BRICS for economic benefits only, but we have been similar to other countries like India, like Vietnam, Thailand. We have been trying to stay away from the political aspect of things. That what China and Russia has been trying to push to politicize the BRICS as a Western alternative kind of entity. We don't really appreciate that perception. So that's one of the reasons why we have been pushing more economic agendas compared to political agendas within the grouping at the moment.
I see. So just to summarize, the main advantage would be the sort of trade deals we are able to like market out through BRICS, but
But
we aren't really
yes,
looking for like full membership. And even in Indonesia's case, it's not exactly what are the clear goals of like full membership rather than
yes.
just being a partner.
And of course, most of us don't really enjoy the political aspect of BRICS that comes with it, the anti-Western sentiment. So our country's been trying to push for, hey, let's look at trade. Let's look at trade. Let's not look at anything else but trade. So that is the general atmosphere at the moment.
Shifting
I'm
to
sure Chris can
another
add more.
multilateral organization, also a pretty hot topic recently. How do you feel about Malaysia's ASEAN chairmanship so far? Do you feel that Malaysia has been able to make good progress in terms of its key priorities and sustainability, inclusivity, and of course its big foreign policy goals in Timor-Leste, South China Sea? What do you think might be the key? I guess just general overview. How do you feel it's been progressing so far?
I think that it's been going okay so far. As the chair rotates, there are high expectations of Malaysia's chairmanship here. When people see that Malaysia is now chairing ASEAN, there are expectations that things will be very big, very grand, lots of progress here, because it is a leading country in ASEAN, right? Of course, alongside Singapore. So, but in terms of progress-wise, I think we're doing okay. A key priority for Malaysia here, beyond the South China Sea, is of course of Myanmar, and there are how would you say? It's a very touchy topic, but Myanmar is definitely a key priority for Malaysia's chairmanship here. And the reason why it is because Malaysia is okay with trying to play, how would you say, a less glamorous role here. What I mean by that is that previous chairs have tried to tackle the ASEAN issue, of course, primarily, especially during the case of Indonesia. They really tried their best to try and tackle the Myanmar situation. But if you notice, the previous chairs have just gone and tried to, how would you say, force solutions down, or take a very top-down driven approach to resolving the Myanmar question. But nobody is necessarily trying to set the foundation up for negotiations in the long term. Everybody wants to claim the glory of resolving the whole Myanmar crisis, the Myanmar question here. But there's not yet been a chair who has solely tried to build the foundations for everybody to come together and talk about it. Everybody just wants to give solutions, but nobody has been taking the effort to do any confidence building measures between the different groups involved in Myanmar or things like that. So as far as I know, Malaysia is trying to do that. And because Myanmar is a big priority list for us, is high on the priority list for us, I think that the progress so far has been relatively good so far.
I mean, if I could push back a little, how realistic is that actually, given that, this has been an issue that we've been struggling at for a long time. It's kind of a dilemma of national sovereign interests that multilateral institutions often struggle to deal with. We see this with the United Nations and places like Israel and Gaza. We have a piece on SSI, which argues that ASEAN should not use its capital and energy on something like Myanmar, but should focus on where we actually know we can make progress on. That is things like economics and trade. How do you kind of think about these competing priorities? As a second question here also is that kind of are the incentives aligned to allow us to make progress on Myanmar? Because we have chairmanships that last 1 year. Myanmar seems to be an issue that will probably take 5 to 10 years to solve. So how do we have this coordination across different chairmanships?
Yeah, I think to go to try to tackle your first point here, is that how feasible or how realistic is this goal here? It is what Malaysia should be doing is not necessarily something that will see results within this chairmanship year. It is. I agree. The question of Myanmar will take longer, half a decade or more, but a chair has to do sacrifice the so-called glory, the glorious side of it, and do the nitty-gritty to at least set up a foundation for this 5 to 10 years to start effectively. You know, now and when you mentioned that. You know that ASEAN, there's some people say that ASEAN should focus on where it can make real progress here, and it should not waste its capital on Myanmar, because there's also concerns about it's a sovereign issue and whatnot. The reality is that ASEAN at some point must evolve too. And it is not clear exactly how that will come to be. But there have been people who have called ASEAN a failure so far, right? There are lots of voices saying that ASEAN has failed. And of course, to resolve that, ASEAN needs to evolve. And whether that means tackling certain sovereign issues, I'm not too sure. But with regard to the ASEAN to wasting capital side of things, that's why there's been a lot of talk as well about, at least we hear from the diplomatic community, is that it shouldn't necessarily go through ASEAN as in finding a unanimous consensus on Myanmar, because that is fundamentally extremely challenging. But rather just utilizing ASEAN minus approach. Just take whoever, it's similar to the Troika mechanism, right? Just taking whoever is interested on the issue in a very pragmatic manner, getting together, talk about Myanmar, and discuss the way forward. It does not necessarily have to get it doesn't officially have to be under ASEAN's main umbrella here, and doesn't have to be you don't have to go through the efforts trying to get that unanimous view.
Out of curiosity, just a really short question. Do you feel the greater challenge to trying to find some form, even a foundation of a solution, is the lack of engagement of local actors within Myanmar, where it's, of course, very diversified, very heterogeneous, and of course they're fighting a bitter civil war? Or at least in the context of ASEAN, it might be the diversity of opinion between the maritime versus the mainland ASEAN countries, and of course then it further entrenched by the need for a full consensus before you can proceed. Which one do you think has been the more challenging aspect for ASEAN to negotiate at the moment?
I think it's a bit of both. If you're talking about the ASEAN level, as an organization, the thing you mentioned about differing views between different parts of ASEAN, I think would be a bigger challenge. But fundamentally, for those ASEAN members who are interested in trying to mediate and negotiate for the conflict, it's difficult to get everybody in the same room together, you see, because there are so many groups that one has to worry about, whether it's the ethnic resistance organizations, of which there are tons of them, all these EROs. There's the NUG, there's the junta, and there's of course also all the foreign actors that are involved in this conflict. Like for example, Wa State is being backed by China. So there is it's hard. But the first one is the one that should be tackled first, and I think is more realistic to do rather than get everybody in ASEAN on the same page here. The first one is trying to just get everybody to sit in a room together, or at least trying to talk to them, to different groups together, rather than engaging just one one side of one of those four. You see, because previous approaches have focused a lot on, just focusing on the NUG, for example, or focusing on just the EROs, but there's yet to be a solid effort or effective effort in trying to put these guys together in a room. And I think that having that difficult, uncomfortable conversation is the first step towards a real solution here.
And just to add on it, I think one of the bigger priorities that we need to also consider is China. I mean, China, like Chris mentioned earlier, is the back of the vast state, but at the same time, it is also an active economic investor to the region in Myanmar. And like it or not, EROs, the NUG, or even the military junta, they have to look at China and see what they feel. And for example, like the upcoming elections for Myanmar, I think I heard from some sources that it's been actively pushed by China to make it happen. And the very fact that China, when they want to push something in Myanmar and everyone just say, okay, maybe we think about it, or maybe even let's do it, I think is a very huge equation in here that ASEAN has to also consider. Like, how can we realistically get Chinese buy-in to ASEAN's line of thinking, ASEAN's alignment to peace and reconciliation in the region, and at the same time not giving China the space to, how to put it more diplomatically, is very touchy again. How do we prevent an over-reliance on China in certain matters? Let's put it that way.
Then perhaps let's turn to the South China Sea, because we know that's another big topic for the ASEAN chairmanship, and that's a priority. ASEAN member states have several disputes with China regarding sovereignty claims in the South China Sea, and this has been a long-standing issue. In April, talks on a proposed code of conduct in the South China Sea resumed, and all parties have pledged to conclude the agreement by 2026. Realistically, what, if any, progress on the COC or on other South China Sea issues can be made in the face of what some people like to call intractable national interests?
The COC is, of course, an elusive document that has been the subject of much discussion and debate and controversy for a very long time for ASEAN. Of course, Muhammad Hassan, our foreign minister, has pledged that Malaysia will try its best to get it done within its chairmanship year. Whether that's realistic, I do not know. I admire and appreciate that he is being optimistic about it, because once you lose that momentum or lose the motivation to carry on forward, it's very difficult. And as I made to understand, the primary blockage here in terms of COC progress is, of course, from China's end. So I don't know. I don't think that there is going to be any. I don't think that it will be done by the time Malaysia's chairmanship ends. But I am hoping to see some good progress here. I think now more than ever, Anwar Ibrahim has crafted a more delicate and intricate relationship with Xi Jinping. And I think that could definitely assist in trying to get ASEAN's agenda of doing the COC, getting it moving forward. But I reserve the right to. I'm still a bit skeptical about it, But I'm really, really hoping for the best here and trying to see something conclusive out of it.
Okay, since we're coming up on time, then we have the ASEAN Summit coming up next week. Maybe from both of you, are there any lookouts for the public who is deeply interested in when was the last time we had a chairmanship? I think it was nearly 10 years
10
ago.
years, 10 years ago, yeah.
Anything we should look out for, and are there any specific predictions we should look out for what comes out of the conference?
Specific predictions. I cannot speak to the other pillars of ASEAN, those having to do with cultural preservation or sustainability or something like that. But in terms of the political security community part of ASEAN, I don't know. I cannot say that I have any specific predictions. I'm not trying to get my hopes too high here, but I am hopeful for something to come out with regard to the South China Sea. I at least hope that some statements can be made about the South China Sea or the Myanmar issue. I think these two are the most pressing security matters for ASEAN, and I think some updates or transparency in how things are going down behind the scenes would be much appreciated. And for me, that would be a positive outcome from next week's summit. I don't know about Zane though.
I mean, our lines of thinking are very similar on this issue. Yes. Although personally, I look forward to the ASEAN GCC China Summit. I think it's not often we have this kind of summit linking China, the Southeast Asia region with the Gulf countries. So I don't have any expectations for out of this, but I just a little bit look forward to what will come out of it, and we'll see how we go from there.
I have to agree on the ASEAN GCC summit, ASEAN China GCC summit. I think that is the characterization of Anwar Ibrahim here, his extent of reach and network in the Middle East. Using his credentials as a Muslim activist in his early days, and bridging that with China, who he's been trying to deepen the relationship with. And to have it all culminate in an ASEAN China GCC summit, I think will be very interesting. I personally do not know what will rise out of that during the summit, but I think it's a very exciting time to be looking at ASEAN, and I'm sure everybody's on the edge of their seats waiting to see what will come out of it. Yeah.
Well, we'll be closely watching it alongside you.
Yeah, I hope so.
Thank you so much for your time, Karisma and Zane. This was a conversation with Karisma and Zane from Bait Al-Amanah on geopolitics, Malaysia's foreign policy, and ASEAN chairmanship. Thank you so much for your time. We look forward to all the developments in the region in the next few weeks.
Thank you,
Jonathan.